Okay, we're back up on the farm for about 8 days for harvest, which means we have access to some trails. So I thought it'd be a good time to review the Altra Mont Blanc Carbon, which has been a bit of an unexpected success over the last couple of months. So Altra kindly sent this one over to me for free, so keep that in mind. I haven't had a whole lot of experience in Altra shoes. I wore a Tauren back in the day. I used the Vanish Carbon and the Vanish Tempo, which I thought were decent. A bit more rockering to those shoes. I thought the foam was pretty good. But this is my first experience in an Altra trail shoe, and I was a little bit worried. Following meme pages like your boy Scott Jurek, checking out Reddit pages as well where people complain about Achilles issues, I was a little bit stressed. But that said, after doing about 80 Ks in this shoe, it has turned into one of my favorite trail running shoes. Does have its limits, does have a few little quirks, but yeah, I really enjoy it. So here's a kind of full rundown. So we'll start off with the specs. We've got 33mm of foam in the heel and 33 in the forefoot for that 0mm drop. In terms of the foam in the midsole, we've got an inner core of Ego Pro foam, which is a nitrogen infused TPU, quite a resilient bouncy foam similar to Light Strike Pro. And then they've gone and wrapped that up in an Ego Max foam, which is an EVA compound for protection, stability, bit more durability. And I think that's a really good setup for these trail shoes. Embedded between those foams, somewhere in and around it, is a very flexible Carbotex carbon plate. I'm not really sure about the carbon plate. I will chat about that later. But yeah, very, very flexible, and I'm pretty sure it's full length. On the outsole, we've got Vibram Light Base, which has a fair few cutouts for weight saving, and quick mention to the anatomical toe box as well. We'll start with the upper. I'll say straight away, I really enjoy the anatomical toe box. Having a bit of extra wriggle room is always appreciated, and I think especially in trail running, on descents especially, it's nice to not have your toes bashing up against the end of the shoes. Some of those sharper toe boxes can really cut in on your pinky toes. So yeah, it's really appreciated here, and I think for most of my trail running shoes, I'd like to see that kind of wider fit through the toe box. The upper material itself is a combination of this kind of stretchy, breathable mesh in the toe box and midfoot, and this more firm, almost like waterproof material up around the heel counter. So it's very locked in around the heel counter, but I did find that I had a little bit of extra room because of the stretch through the midfoot, which meant that when I hit a few rocks or roots that kind of put me out to the edge of the shoe, it didn't always hold me on as securely as I probably would have liked. Maybe we need a bit more reinforcement through here to kind of securely lock down onto that midsole. But other than that, I really like the materials here. I think they're comfortable. In the heel counter, we've got a little bit of reinforcement, a fairly low cut heel counter as well, which is fairly typical of Altra. I did have a bit of heel slip initially, took a bit of time to learn how to lace the shoe up, but once I got it up and running, didn't really have many issues. Fairly padded around there as well. It's a comfortable upper. I like having the extra room, but I do think that with that extra room, you lose a little bit of that security on those kind of more technical terrains. I think it's a good upper. I think it's a decent lockdown. Overall, it's getting a kind of B+ for me. Moving down to the midsole, this is where things started to get interesting, and I was quite scared of the 0mm drop taking it out onto the trails. And I'll be honest, my first run in this shoe was quite unpleasant. The 0mm drop combined with the plate, which hadn't really broken in yet, and the foams, which were still a bit stiff, really blew up my calves on the first ascent. They pretty much blew up to be balloons with the amount of blood that was running through them, and I kind of thought that my run was over. I thought that the shoe was no good for me and I wouldn't be able to get along with it. I did persist, and by the end of the run, I was kind of starting to change my mind. They started to break in a bit, smooth out, but it was only in the next couple of runs after that, once I kind of worked out how to run in these shoes, once they'd broken in, and once I think I started to get a bit more calf strength, did they really start to open up. I think for me, this is not a shoe that I'd use for a really hilly trail race. I'll still take them up into the Perth Hills for training runs because I really enjoy how they feel on the downhills. But when I'm kind of racing, risking it all, I don't really want to have the risk of blowing up my calves halfway through. One of the standout aspects of the ride of this shoe for me is the descending. Going down hills, I think this feels exceptionally smooth, and that does come down to the 0mm drop. With more high drop shoes, kind of getting up into that 8 or 10mm drop, when you're kind of on the descent, you're kind of getting a fair bit of clunk from the heel. The heel is more present, it's more unavoidable on the descents, and you get that kind of moment where the heel hits the ground, bit of instability there, which is not always a great feeling. With the 0mm drop, I kind of felt like I was getting an almost full face of midsole landing on the ground, all of the grip as well, working at once, and I felt really secure, smooth, and efficient going downhill. Bit of an ironic shame that the best part of the shoe for me, which is descending, happens after the worst part, which is climbing, but overall I've started to really enjoy this more smooth, efficient feel that I get from this shoe. On more smooth, undulating terrain, I definitely noticed I was getting more up into my forefoot, and it gave me this weird sensation where I felt like I was running faster than I actually was. Does that actually mean anything? I don't really think so, but is it a nice sensation to have, to feel kind of springy and fast on the trails? Yeah, I did enjoy it. In terms of more technical trail, I think that this does a decent job. It wouldn't be my first pick for a kind of all-out single track, rocky, rooty, slippery track, but compared to other trail shoes out there which are much more buffed in the heel, and a little bit more compressive, I think it does a pretty good job. For me, the race that kind of stands out in Western Australia that I probably want to use this shoe for would be the Margaret River Ultra Marathon. Not a whole lot of elevation there, fairly smooth. You got a bit of sand, and I think this could do a pretty good job because you're not having to rely on its climbing ability. In terms of the carbon plate in this shoe, I haven't mentioned it because I'm not so sure that it really impacts the ride in any meaningful way. Traditionally, the way that a carbon plate works is that it gives the midsole some real stiffness to reinforce a rocker off the toe. That's how it works in the road super shoes. It's kind of offloading your ankle joint to give you that kind of efficiency. But with the flexibility here and the kind of lack of any meaningful rocker, I'm not really sure what this Carbotex plate is doing other than acting as a kind of rock plate. It's kind of just there in the midsole, protecting your foot from really sharp sticks and rocks, but I'm not really sure that it's contributing to the overall performance of the shoe, which makes me wonder whether they could have cut costs by using a plastic plate or just no plate at all. It doesn't impede the ride in any way, but I would just be interested to see how the shoe feels without that plate embedded. On the outsole, we've got Vibram light base lugs. They're not super deep, but for most purposes in Western Australia, they handle things pretty well. If I was going to be doing a muddy trail race, this would probably be my top pick right now, especially compared to the Adidas Agravic Terex Speed Ultras. Those shoes don't have a whole lot of lug depth. This is definitely grippier than that, and with the 0mm drop, I'm often getting more surface area on the ground as well. So yeah, this would probably be a slightly grippier shoe for me, but we don't get a whole lot of mud. It's not like the UK where you're running through an absolute bog. The best that you're going to get is a bit of water running down a gravel track, and this has handled that completely fine. The durability of that outsole has been pretty good. I do land on the outside edge of my shoe and you can see a little bit of wear on those outer lugs, and a bit of this foam is chewed up as well, but I consider that to be superficial, not going to be impacting the durability. We'll round this off with the price point and some recommendations. It's coming in at $350, which I think is probably a bit much considering the kind of narrow scope of people who are actually going to be able to enjoy this shoe. For me, the ideal person that would enjoy this shoe is someone who has, first off, a good degree of lower limb strength, especially through the calf and Achilles. If you're already a bit of a forefoot runner and you kind of get up onto your toes and you feel comfortable running in that kind of style, I think you could get away with this shoe. I'd say more experienced runners as well. I think you need to know what you like in a shoe to then be able to say, yeah, I want that 0mm drop. I want that kind of smooth, efficient feel. I want that wide toe box. I think you need to have that experience to then identify that this shoe could work for you. I would never recommend this to a beginner, someone who hasn't had a whole lot of experience on the trails, especially someone who doesn't have a whole lot of mileage in the legs and doesn't know what works for their body. For $350, it's definitely pigeonholing itself as a kind of niche, more premium racing shoe. But I think for the people that like that 0mm drop and kind of already know that they like Altra, this will be a really good pick. It's a bit risky for everybody else who maybe only buys one trail shoe for, 5 or 10 years. Maybe if the price was around $300, my recommendation would be a bit more enthusiastic. Bit of a tricky one to kind of go out and recommend freely to people who don't have a full understanding of what they're kind of getting themselves into. So yeah, that's my little review. I'll keep on using it. I think it's a nice little trail racer, but yeah, a little bit niche.